Tonight, we're going to talk about climate activism. You're well aware that the case of climate change is ever more becoming serious. In fact, it has reached the level of an existential crisis. In some young groups who organize together to create a social movement, they express their environmental anxiety. This is a new phrase to describe what you feel, the type of anxiety that you feel towards the problematic environment. As they say, we live in the midst of not just crisis but disaster. Anywhere you look, there's a possible or prospective destruction and disruption by the looks of rivers being encroached by structures and buildings, riverbeds are being closed or eroded by human made construction. Things like this, when you look around, would tell you that humanity has really done its job to destroy the planet rather than to repair the planet. We are ambivalent with regard to the action that we should partake in saving or mitigating the impact of climate crisis. We've been through a lot of discussions regarding the ontology of art, its involvement in filling in the gaps of knowledge and the gaps in aesthetics in our community. In fact, in aestheticizing our environment, we always look up to artistic principles. And now we are facing a great climate crisis. We're looking at the possibility of merging disciplines, multidisciplines in dealing with this singular problem, but ridiculously hard to solve. The thoughts on the ground are always about statistics, data driven analysis that will aid in informing the decision makers what to do with our climate crisis. But we fail to realize that right brain approach can also be effective in tackling climate change. Right brain approach is specifically referring to artistic engagement to communicate better the narratives of vulnerable people who are now experiencing the brunt of sea level rise. For those people living in gated communities who are living uphill, even those marginalized in the community, they are having a psychological gap with the actual experience of people who are suffering the brunt of the climate crisis. They're not directly aware or feeling the change of the environment because they are living in a safer environment, similar to what we feel right now. We are not living in a coastal area, at least most of us, or if we're living in a coastal region, at least our area is not yet experiencing worse kind of sea level rise. It's still bearable. But how about those who are already flooding or constantly being rocked by flood water? Their properties and even livelihood are gone. Now they're being displaced, nowhere to go. With economic down spiraling as we emerge out of the pandemic, these people who are vulnerable become or find themselves very much empty handed and they look up to the government for help. Now, the government, from the executive branch to departments, are even more ambivalent and confused with regard to how to tackle climate change. They appear to be knowledgeable, with the exception of some former executives or presidents of friendly states like the United States of America, who considered climate change as a hoax. Well, that former president really repeatedly evaded questions or critical questions regarding climate change because he could not offer anything as a matter of policy, similar to previous presidents and current probably president in the Philippines. Every topic related to environment is delegated to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, which is also not really doing its good job with regard to dealing with miners, mining company, and pollution. I'm sorry to say, but they have a lot of policies, yes, but if you're going to reflect as a human being on those policies, these policies are not really driven to mitigate substantially the crisis in environment that we are experiencing. It's like giving a permit to those big corporations to pollute, furthermore, our natural resources. I have seen a document regarding pollution discharge permit, allowing communities to maintain the threshold of pollution or pollutants that they discharge to water and air. So that means to say, with allowable discharges, we can legally pollute our environment. Okay. I might be just too emotional in saying that the department is not really doing a good job. It's part of me that is really frustrated, probably. So pardon me for saying that. Siguro it's because we are living in a great bedrock of irony. We want change, but the system is really hard to change because it's deeply rooted. So every piece that we change in that system would not really create a substantial effect. Just like allowing corporations, companies, or every establishment to legally pollute according to the permit. They just have to renew the permit to be legal again in polluting the environment. So how can we stomach this kind of bureaucratic policy making? Okay. Now, with regard to mining corporations, since we earn a lot of money from mining companies, I think we're also ambivalent. We let them do responsible, sustainable mining. But still, if you're going to analyze critically the situation or impact of responsible mining, yes, it is decreasing the negative impact, but it is still mining for God's sake. Okay, it is still a disruptor. Now, what if there are a lot of miners given permit to mine? This would still amount to a a grave total destruction. What if in the next 4 years or 5 years there will be an increase of corporations granted by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources permit to pollute water and air with their system, with their generators, for example, okay, with their factory machines. And let's multiply the number again across another 5 years and another 5 years and another 5 years. If this policy will not be uh, amended, we are still heading towards the same path of destruction. We're just delaying the destruction. That is the matter of fact on the ground. Now, sometimes statistics and data analysis are too remotely related to phenomenological experience of people, those that are affected extremely. So we need artistic minded people to reintroduce everything about climate change from causes, effects to policy making. We just need to be clear with our idea, improve the quality of presenting knowledge about climate crisis or climate change, especially that not all children or people are blessed with an ability to afford basic education. So they're scholastically challenged. We need to reach out furthermore to those individuals. And how can we do it if we give them a steady diet of statistics, data, trend, data analysis about how we are doing with regard to climate change action. The data for scientists really spell out the same thing. It's really dismal. It's You will really read it with a sigh. But if you package the idea probably in a different manner, right brain manner, target the seat of emotion to introduce encouragement and motivation to act despite the challenges, despite the depressing, dismal situation, I think it will be better. The facts are not emotional. They cannot be happy, numbers cannot be sad, data statistics cannot be angry, they cannot be emphatic. But once you create a narrative, you can inject a lot of emotions there because you're talking about people. The characters are people, feeling, sentient individuals with morals and ethics. Perhaps you would not be able to give up easily on humanity if you tackle climate change using the right brain approach rather than purely left brain approach that would appeal to the scientific community only. How many scientists had claimed that they have written a lengthy article about climate action, yet they were read only by three, four, or five individuals? This is a very low number of readers. So, how do we amplify and reach a multitude of culture and ethnicity and social demographics beyond the numbers, beyond the statistics? Right brain approach. If you're going to package the message, the quality would be dictated by principles of design. I'm hyperextending here the reach of principles of design. You can unify the idea so that there will be leaning towards one aspect of the message. We cannot crowd the message with a lot of sub concepts. Efficiency is where you deliver the message with increased transmissibility, okay, with faster rate of, you know, imparting knowledge. We can't just gather 1,000 individuals in an auditorium to discuss about climate change. That's inefficient. What efficient is, you install public art, engage public art because it's a force multiplier. It can encourage people, motivate people to perform or to be part of this performativity of space. And while they're performing, participating, and subjecting themselves to interpretation and feeling the emotions of the moment, they will be transplanted into an atmosphere of social activism, from passivity to social activism. At least there's a motivation to act when you see so many people participating in a public art. We're not just focusing on visual, but we're performing and at the same time engaging in other sensorial experiences, democratizing art so that it can reach even the differentially abled individuals who cannot really see artworks, but they can hear, they can feel other individuals participating, the vibrations of sounds. We can package the design of the message in terms of clarity, the focusing on the single message or the simple message will be the stepping stone to create a clear, sharp message. Do not crowd the message with so many concepts. Simplifying and targeting a single concept is enough for the right brain approach. Clarity can also be effected if you choose the right mode, model, and medium. Clarity can also be based on the quality of performance. Clarity is when you are sincere with the message, and that you are specific or specifically delivering the message to intended groups or individuals. In art presentation, we don't just present to a generic public, but we have a target group, social group, groups that constitute human beings or social beings who are sensitive. So when we profile our audience, we can be clear with our message, with our approach, with our model. Connection or ability to bring experience down to the performance or the presentation of art is effective in packaging the message. If you're addressing a fishing village, the context of the artwork related to climate change should relate to fishing, to that livelihood, or to the sea as their immediate environment, how the water level rise affects the life in the community or the villages, how it changes their lifestyle, how it will increase their risk across time. The focus of the narrative will be that. For clarity, the locus will be maintained, sea, fishing village, and will revolve around that anchor. It's quite illogical if you discuss urban environment in the context of fishing village. Sometimes we intentionally mess up with the message to attract listeners and observers. When we hear an unusual story like KMJS, for example, I know that Jessica Soho is a fisher for unique stories, anything for that matter. And she has a team of pseudo experts sometimes. If the message is intriguing, people become interested. It is related to our primordial attitude or instinct, whereby if there is something puzzling or mysterious, our flight or flee system is activated to tell you that you need to solve this visual puzzle because it's a threat. You need to solve or figure your way out, for example, in a maze because it's a threat. So consider illogicality as kind of threatening or activating our stress response. That is exactly what is being exploited by the artist so that our flight response or stress response will be up, and then we will be engaged and totally focused on the work. At least in that sense, we can be depth first. When you are depth first, that means to say you will be excluding external factors to focus only on one particular subject. That happens a lot when you're studying for a specific subject. You ignore art appreciation because you have major subject. I guess that's a good example of depth first. Okay? Ignore everything about everything else so that you can focus only on one subject. Focusing on idea, as I was saying a while ago, unifying the idea is building a consistent, okay, element on a singular idea or on a simple idea. Do not crowd everything because there's always a time for all of the topics regarding or subject regarding climate change. The major flaw of presenting something about climate change is you present everything in 1 hour of presentation. Only like 11 or even lesser 5% of the presentation will be retained by people. Whereas if you let it be easy to the recipient, remember you're addressing not just the literate community but the illiterate community. Excuse me for the reference. Okay, you are if you're too complex in messaging, I don't think that those individuals belonging to the other sector will absorb the information. So always aim for simplicity and unify the idea, build on a single concept, and there will be another chance for another concept. Well, the thing is, we're in a hurry, but we don't need to be. Yes, we're in a hurry because we are in a global crisis, but we have no choice. We need to have a focus after all. Okay? If not, nothing will be efficient, nothing will be potent. The criticism against art is always revolving around the argument that it takes time to build the concept using art. It takes time to realize the solution if we use art or right brain approach. However, we underappreciate always the reflective dimension of slowing things down. Because if you reach that point of reflective thinking, that is the only sustainable force that will allow you to consistently participate in the reform or in the mending of our damaged planet. It can sustain your energy all across the program of sustainability if you have reached the point of reflective thinking. But if you haven't reached that point, which can be accessed easily using art or progressively using art, then you will be jumping on decision after decision without knowing its implication or without putting into the picture human beings that will be affected. You'll be doing genetic decision making and you'll be only comparing decisions done by other countries and decisions that you are ought to do. Other than that, nothing is substantial. Scale and proportion is better expressed in this. A good guy had created a floating sculpture using disposed plastic bag, and he was trying to evoke how much have we littered or how enormous the garbage or litters are in the surface of the planet. He's trying to illustrate it by emphasizing the message with regard to scale. It is floating so that the remote people or remote observers will be able to see it. So it's part of scaling up the message. If it is grounded on the ground, it may not be seen from afar, where it might be too commonplace. Remember that commonplace is the enemy of interest because it is less stimulating. So artists would always feature something in a unique way, just like this. So a mound of garbage is very simple. So the artist elevated or levitated the mound of garbage. So people will realize that we have already created monuments of garbage, in fact. And what do we do with these monuments of garbage? They remain on the surface of the planet. They will suffocate the earth. This is a learning point for all of us to return to creative use and reuse or minimize plastic use, single use of plastic, and so on and so forth. That's for scale. We can create contrast juxtaposing ideas. I like the idea of Pablo Picasso when he had made this one out of his concern of the massacre in Korea. He put together two opposing concepts, the oppressed and the oppressor. You better appreciate or sharply appreciate a complicated idea if you contrast it with its opposite. The opposite idea will even more clarify what is what is unclear with regard to the the opposite concept. So if you do not understand totally what oppressed is, the oppressor is illustrated over here. So you have the chance to compare what's in the oppressor and what's in the oppressed. Similar to when you want to understand better what loneliness is, so you need to look at presence, okay? How happy you are when people are around you, but when you're alone, okay, you're sad. So conversely, if you want to know what loneliness is, just consider what presence is, what being surrounded is. So in that case, mao na siyang giingon nga you are extending. If the topic is loneliness, you're extending your understanding about it by your mind traveling across disciplines or across ideas, intertextual. If you want to understand this text, understand it in the context of another text that may oppose that text. Or last example, if you want to understand the argument, okay, at hand, you can better understand it in the context of opposing environment. I mean argument. There are examples of movement and emphasis in the subsequent slides, and I'm going to flash them one by one. Dissemination of knowledge is our primary concern. If the community has knowledge gap, what do? We teach that community for pertaining to what we preach all of the time about climate crisis. In some parts of the world, there were graffitis on walls and on buildings. And this one struck my attention because it reminded me of, again, policymakers who are still debating about the existence of global warming and climate change. As they're debating on the table, they are ignoring the evidence that is right under their nose. Like this physical evidence, the rise of sea level, it would only take a like a good 5 to 10 years for this graffiti to be washed off by water. I might be exaggerating that the duration might be too narrow, but let's just imagine in 10 years, where will the sea level be? Or probably the entire global warming phase will be submerged. Okay. Then another couple of years, probably we don't see I don't blame in anymore. So this is the physical evidence that is being ignored by these people, politicians, who are shown here almost submerged in water, but still debating on the existence of global warming or climate change. And in fact, the debate had evolved into whether it is human induced or a natural climate change that we are experiencing. And sometimes the argument is brought about by partisanship that your party believes in this kind of policy and stance towards global warming. And as opposed to that policy and stance, the Republicans, for example, believe in a different system, in a different model. So there is no singular model in looking at solving the climate change or looking at the magnitude of worseness of the climate change. With these differing opinions and insights, I don't know, we cannot come together to create a universal solution. Add to that is the complexity of our economic or world economic views about countries, about states, that developing countries cannot really use the developed countries' strategy against climate crisis because it's poor. It does not have funding. And you know, climate change debt trap is really a thing. When you are struck by an extreme weather disturbance, so there are international, okay, sympathetic organization who will let your country borrow. This is a debt trap, but with searing interest rates. even more expensive. It's more expensive for a developing country to borrow than for developed country to borrow. Can you imagine that? So we will be buried, okay, at neck level with debts that we owe to these sympathetic, so to speak, organizations that really, uh, I mean, don't they see the condition of the Philippines and other developing countries? Do they think that we can pay in a matter of three years or 5 years our debt? Every year we experience catastrophe. Every year we borrow money. We keep on borrowing money because again the catastrophe, the destruction is unimaginable in every region in the Philippines once hit by the typhoon. I like humor and sarcasm as approach because it is effective to people. Remember intrigue, the flight and flee explanation that I did a while ago. This one is a very lame activity. This guy is nailing down the seawater so that he will prevent it from advancing furthermore towards the ground. It showcases the inevitability of the rise of sea level. No matter how you would stop it, it will rise. If we don't have an effective solution and worldwide based cooperation in fighting or mitigating the seawater rise or sea level rise by dealing with or uh, dealing with the core or the source of the problem, fossil fuels. Companies are still using a lot of fossil fuels. We're actually burning a lot of energy by engaging in this online class. That's what I am telling my classes with regard to being involved or participating in climate action. We're actually trapped in this system because of our um, it could be cultural or it could be because corporations are really compelling us to be less efficient in fighting climate change. Like, for example, if our intention is to save the glaciers, it does not reflect always in our policy making and with the situation of everyday activity. This guy creates a visual irony because he's hugging a chunk of ice, and at the same time, he is increasing the rate at which the ice would melt. Even if his gesture is expressing concern about glaciers, he's not actually helping in saving the glaciers because his action, consciously or unconsciously, is increasing the rate at which it would melt. Aestheticizing the public space is not enough. Some would say it's gentrification, it's sanitizing a space that is no longer livable. Like just a stone throw away, probably there are shanties, squatter shanties, and this can contribute to the urban decline. If you sanitize the environment with the use of murals, as they say, it doesn't really solve the problem. But on the other hand, there is really a positive impact with regard to murals of climate action on the walls and the sides of public infrastructure, because this will serve as a stopper for people who are passing by. It will serve as a mirror reflection for people, and it is the way that art expresses its presence over to the community rather than to hide inside the gallery. It means that art is involved in information dissemination. The iconic images of Mother Earth creates more of a return to earth theme. If this will be multiplied across the community, people will keep on seeing and remembering Mother Nature. Anywhere they go, Every corner reminds them of Mother Nature. It's like giving them the opportunity to think. Among all other things that they think every day, they have an opportunity to gaze at or to reflect on Mother Nature with constant reminder. Since we are a forgetful culture, we are also very obstinate with regard to our um, with regard to our current opinion about something that has really been our opinion for a long, long time, that we are not willing to change it. Similar to probably those who would say that climate change is a hoax. It has been their opinion since the beginning of 1950s, for example, when there was a clamor um, for green projects, and it had not changed across time. So avoid obstinateness. Just look at the evidence, physical evidence from the scientific community. The thing about our culture right now is we distrust science. And sometimes science is too much attached to scientism, claiming that only science can grow facts and good basis for action and decision making. It does not make sense. Science is not alone with tackling very serious issues. So you cannot say in a scientism manner that science is the only repository of knowledge or valid knowledge. That's in the past. Okay, scientism is supposed to be in the past. I don't know why neo-scientism is perking up today. We really need to balance the the knowledge basis, or else uh, we're working on a machine that we know will not really operate in the future because it lacks one component, the right brain approach. So they call it gentrification if you aestheticize the public for no reason at all, other than the elite will move in and will try to push back all of those informal settlers and sanitize the environment, grow a building on that spot. So finally, they colonize the area, and they will have total control of the area by forcing people to be displaced. That is the essence of gentrification. You're sanitizing the place so that the elite can move in. I don't know if our local politicians are currently aware that they are being trapped by corporations to sanitize some of the areas, okay, so that the elite and other corporate entities can move in, displacing furthermore common citizens. But there is again, don't get me wrong. There is really a positive effect on aestheticizing public spaces. It will make people responsible about the space that they are living in to avoid further urban decline. We are just distracted probably with a lot of concerns that we are not focused on a singular matter. This installation art is very much affective because it evokes a recolonization of the forest, similar to the theme in the movie Annihilation of the planet Earth. We have two worlds, man-made and natural world. The natural world is finally reclaiming its space in the human-made world, trying to twist and twirl around posts and columns in this complex. Look at this. It's like these trees are alive and have minds of their own, and their desire to recolonize the earth, eh, is is really showing off, okay, or dramatized in this installation art. Agnes Deans created a lot with Whitfield I guess she claimed a 2 hectare area and then she planted wheat. You have the twin towers in the background, which is no longer here, of course, because of the 9/11, where wheat is or was traded. Agnes Deans posed an essential question: are we going to maintain the business center, or are we going to protect agricultural land so that we can plant more wheat? In the urban area, you notice that we are already spilling over towards agricultural land. Our urban area is too close to agricultural land. And eventually, in the future, the agricultural land will also be affected by the development in the city, expanding the city towards the agricultural land. So Agnes Deans asked this essential question: in the near future, food will be essential because there are many people in the population. If we keep on growing skyscrapers, these skyscrapers will not feed the entire population. Yet again, the scientists and those people who believe in scientism had said genome, okay, manipulation is already available. So genetic engineering using nanotechnology, then sensitizing the nanotech with or the nanomaterials with enzymes to create a foodstuff. They can easily say that because they are empowered with their scientific knowledge. The thing about being empowered with knowledge, sometimes we forget the basic concept of humanity. Okay? From the same Agnes Deans, she created a protected artificial forest in in her kanang um, in her project of supporting the reforestation or the growing of the forest once more on areas that had been affected by logging and by forest fires. The UN Council supported the project and realized that the objective of Agnes Deans is really laudable, that it should be multiplied across other regions. So they spent money to protect this area. So nobody can modify the area unless the UN would allow or unless the contract has expired. So they spend money on developing, maintaining this area until it will become a virgin forest again. In Ellison Olafor's reflexivity of art, he always features reflection of humanity, asking how do we live together? How do you think of yourself? How do you see yourself? These questions are hard to answer, of course, but in the context of climate change, how do we really see or how do we live together? Well, climate change would introduce scarcity. The question of how do we live together becomes more essential or at the core of our existence in everyday crisis management. Can you imagine if we struggle for food in the next couple of years? Answering the question how we live together would uh, would require us to or would compel us to confess that we are not living harmoniously anymore, admitting that it's so hard to deal with neighbors when I have my own concern. Unifying and harmonizing individuals in the post-industrialized world or in the fourth industrialized world is very hard because we've been taught to live isolatively and to have our own personal concerns. The original community was dependent on each other's member. On each other. Okay, because of the lack of technology to individually do your job, we are forced to cooperate. That was the good thing about our primordial community. But today, since we are more individualized in our concept of work, we are taught how to how to be self-autonomous. And this self-autonomy has really affected our perception of the planet. Now we distrust everybody else instead of trusting someone. We are actually producing the culture of distrust. When I walk with my mother in one of the streets in Cebu, she's always being wary of strangers approaching us, or I mean, strangers past walking past our area, okay, whispering to my ear, this could be a tulisan, okay. The distrust is this is one example of a distrust. I mean, a culture of distrust that has developed across the years, and we have not unlearned how we have not unlearned the distrust that we have learned. Okay, it continues. I think there's a generation that is really very distrustful because of the impact. I think it's the ones born in 1940s, 1950s are really very distrustful because that age, these people had just come off from World War. This is a kind of movement effect. In physical movement, we transport from one area to the target area. But in this climate art, the movement of an individual is being symbolic and ceremonial. This spiral bridge was installed in one of the climate crisis or climate activist gallery as a doorway, similar to your portal in TC. You go inside the university from outside of the portal as a symbolic act. Okay, you're finally moving in. That's why it's called portal, because the portal transport you to the world of knowledge. Now here, this bridge transports you to the world of social activism. So the design is about movement, but the impact is more intangible. You will be changed from the mood of passivity to the mood of activism. This was done by the same artist, Ellison Olafur, an enormous orb that represents the sun. He invited people to look at it and openly be subjective in responding to it. Uh, Somehow people had mixed reaction, but the most common reaction is this the kind of environment we're facing in the future if the sun is too close, if the planet is too warm. Now, it's not really warm in this environment or excruciatingly um, warm, but the image that is being presented, the radiated light, seems to suggest that it's unbearable. If the sun is too close to the earth, that's the heat amount or the heat range that we're going to face in the future. The concept is permeating as well because below this deck is a business center, a commercial center. So people who just buy stuff in this complex would still feel the um I mean they would still see the orb, and they will still feel probably the atmosphere around the complex. The permeating quality of this installation is one of the unique feature that Ellison introduced. This is actually a half circle, but because there is an enormous mirror on the ceiling, the half circle became a complete circle representing the sun. He really centered on participatory mode and open subjectivity, as I mentioned a while ago. So once you enter the complex, regardless of what you want to do in the complex, you will be part of the performance. Now, some critics had really called Ellison off for installing 200 bulbs or more around that. I mean, on the surface or on the material of the orb, um, commenting that is this really energy efficient? I thought that you are a climate activist, but why are you burning or using a lot of energy? Sometimes when your intention is really to preach something, art is not really a perfect concept. Sometimes if your intention is to preach, we are blindsided or we are blinded by the weakness of the mode or the medium that we are using, or we are blind about the weakness in the medium that we are using. It's true. Ellison admitted that because of his overpowering emotion of really uniquely presenting the too close to comfort idea, because he started floating the idea of too close to comfort, how he's going to operate on it was really the uh, the masterpiece that he was perfecting. So he is focused more on the message and probably ignored the fact that he's using a lot of bulbs. The participatory performance may not be totally energy efficient and totally living the standard of climate activists preaching, but the message is efficiently delivered because the packaging is more targeting the seat of emotion rather than the intellect. So it's more of phenomenological experience. What in open subjectivity, how do you feel about this when the sun is too close for comfort?